Leslie Sturges, take it away. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
And thanks for whoever hit recording.
Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Leslie Sturges, and I'm the president of the Save Lucy campaign. And we do education, rescue, and rehabilitation. And those last two are for Virginia's native bats. I've been doing this for 20 years now. It's our 20-year anniversary for doing bat rehabilitation, and I've had my hands on several thousand bats at this point. I'm here to talk to you about bats because they're so closely associated with caves. This is going to be a whirlwind tour of Virginia's 16 species of bats. So let's get started, I think. How do I do? Oh, there we go. So just some basics. I know everyone here is probably fairly familiar with bats, but just in case, they are the world's only flying mammal. They fly with their hands, plus some other pretty decent adaptations. So you've got, this is not one of our native bats, but it was a pretty good photo showing the wings in action. So what you have here is the upper arm, lower arm, the little itty bitty wrist here, and then we have digit 1, commonly referred to as the thumb, and digit 2, 3, 4, and 5. So these are the fingers. And the fingers are the primary, well, I don't want to say primary, they're an important support structure for the wing. If you'll notice, they've got this amazing membrane that hitches here at the shoulder, goes up and around the edge of the wing, comes all the way around here, and then attaches at the ankle. And then for almost all of the bats, you've got this tail membrane. Now in our bats, they have this little structure here. It's a calcified structure, a cartilaginous structure called a blanking. Anyway, it helps stiffen the tail membrane, which is really important to them because it helps steer, and it also is really important for securing food. So then as you can see, it goes all the way up over here and comes around. So a bat in flight is about 80% wing. And everywhere that these joints occur, they're just like us. They can bend at every joint. So they're really agile flyers. They are the second largest group of mammals on the planet. There's over 1,400 species. Just a few years ago, that number sat right around 1,100. So taxonomists have been really busy, but bats are fascinating and people are very interested in them right now for some kind of negative reasons, but new discoveries are being made all the time about bats. They're mostly small. Flight kind of means you need to be little or have really long and stiff wings. So bats have gone in the little and flexible direction. So most of them are very small, but relative to body size, they're one of the longest live mammals. There's a little 4-gram bat from Europe called a Brandt's bat, and one was recaptured in the wild, banded. So they were able to identify the birth year, and it was 41 years old, and that's a 4-gram animal. So these guys live very long lives, and they have very few young. Most have only 1 or 2 per year. There's a couple of outliers that can have more than that, but they're rare. So really low reproductive rates for tiny animals that live a long time. Now, we all know bats are nocturnal. I'm going to say they're mostly nocturnal because there are some species that are more crepuscular, that are more active at dawn and dusk. They can also be awake during the day. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with them. So they are mostly nocturnal, but can take excursions out during the day. Most of them use echolocation to navigate and to find prey and secure prey. So that echolocation probably is sort of the original bat was an echolocating mammal, and that helps you when you're running around at night trying to catch small insects at night. Most bats are insectivores. Most bats eat bugs. But when you've got a group of 1,400 species, there's room for some diversity. So we do have some 3 species of blood feeders. There are some fish specialists. There are nectar bats. There are fruit bats. But we don't have any of those exotic feeding strategies here in Virginia. All of our bats are insectivores. So let's watch one doing its thing. This is in super slow motion, so you're able to hear the echolocation calls as it's happening. This is from Aaron Corcoran's lab, does fabulous work, and you can get it on YouTube. Notice it's using its wing and its tail membrane. And look at this somersaulting and spinning and twisting and holding itself up in the air while it's maneuvering the prey in its tail membrane, and it still misses. And then straight up into the air, you can see the whole body's involved in flying and missing. Predators miss a lot. And here we have the classic armpit catch into the tail membrane, manages to get the insect in its mouth and flies away. I'd like to point out that bats are flying around with their mouths open because they're echolocating. Hang on, they're echolocating, so they aren't flying around with their mouths hanging open to find people to bite. Some things I want you to know about Virginia's bats. They are all, again, insectivores. They eat bugs. We don't have fruit bats anywhere in the United States or north into Canada. We do have a couple of nectar feeders that occur in the desert Southwest, but for right now, no fruit or nectar feeders in Virginia. All of them are insectivores, and certainly no vampire bats. A nursing bat mother eats her own weight in insects every night, and that is a lot of insects. If you consider a 15-gram female big brown bat and want to go out there and catch 15 grams of insects and count them, I encourage you to do so. That's a lot of insects, and every mother bat is out there doing that every night that she can. Virginia's bats are all small. Our largest one is a 30-gram bat, and that's just over an ounce. So they are not large animals. They are vulnerable to predators. Crows, raccoons, snakes, cats are all, some raptors are issues for bats. They don't attack people. If a bat's flying by your head, it's flying by to get away from you, to get by you because there's something behind you it wants to look at. They don't attack people. They don't attack things that are larger than themselves, and that's pretty much true of animals in general. But don't touch them, just leave them alone. Despite the disease concerns, rabies is the big one with bats, but just keep your fingers off the wild animals and they'll appreciate it. You'll be safer. There's really not many reasons that you would need to directly touch a wild animal. And they will bite in self-defense. I mean, if you corner anything with teeth, it's going to give you a chomp if it feels like it can't get away. And because bats can't spring into flight, they will, if pushed hard enough, definitely defend themselves because they can't get away from you. And we've been hit by white nose syndrome here. I want to say 2008 is when it first arrived in Virginia. So we have lost 90% of our cave dependent hibernating bats. And that's just a huge, huge loss. And that was suspected, but a recent study came out that bears out that it is 90% of our cave dependent hibernating bats are gone. Can they mount a recovery now in the habitat we have available to them? Maybe, maybe not, we don't know. It's time will tell. But all of the bat species in Virginia are on the decline. And a lot of that has to do with habitat loss, but then we have white nose on top of that. So bats need friends. Just a little bit of housekeeping about this presentation. It is available on our website in a more in-depth form. There's a lot of words in this one. I'm gonna go through them quickly, but if you want to go back and investigate what bats are here and what they look like, you can find it on the savelucythebat.org. And what you'll find is these little challenge things that are in there are actually, they link to more information. So it's actually a really cool way to go find out more about bats. But because it's a presentation online and we're reaching out to everybody of all means, we needed to come up with some ways to translate bat sizes. And because we weigh them in grams and they're very small, and most people think of fruit bats and they think in many inches and feet and meters and yards, and bats are smaller than that. So we wanted to come up with some universal ways of help, well, universal for North America, ways of helping people sort of understand sizes. So because we weigh in grams, that 1 gram is a raisin or a dollar bill or a small paper clip, and kids don't really use small paper clips anymore, and they don't run around with dollars in their pockets. So we had to come up with something else. And I started weighing candy because I did this during Bat Week, which is in October. And we came up with a gummy bear, you know, a good quality gummy bear, not the 10 bags for $1 kind, but a nice, good quality gummy bear weighs about 3 grams. So that's going to be our unit of measure is gummy bears. And then for length, we wanted to find something that was pretty uniform and that everybody could be familiar with. And it's the snack size Twizzler, not the long rope Twizzler, but the little snack size ones that you get around Halloween. That is 4 1/4 inches. Some other interesting ways we found to talk to people about how to measure sizes is an inch is approximately the length between the tip of an adult thumb to the first knuckle. And then when we measure wingspans, we're measuring from tip to tip of wing. So it's the same way you would measure the wingspan of a bird or whatever. A term you're going to see we use is hibernacula. That is the multiple of hibernaculum, which is where hibernating bats spend the winter. And most of ours in Virginia use, well, not most, half of ours in Virginia use caves as hibernacula. And white nose syndrome, I've mentioned it already. It's a fungal disease. It's caused by an invasive fungus that got introduced into a single cave in New York. Well, we think a single cave in New York back in 2006, 2007. And from there, it has spread through the eastern half of the US. It's just now crossing the Rockies. It's affecting numerous species of bats. It's pretty much the biggest wildlife disease in recorded history that we know of, affecting more species and on a wider basis than just about anything else, even more so than West Nile. So if you're interested in learning more about white nose syndrome and looking at spread maps, I highly recommend whitenosesyndrome.org. That's a really great resource for learning more about it. So when we talk about bats, we break them into sort of categories, and you'll often hear people talk about crevice roosting bats, tree bats, foliage roosting bats, and just other ways of sort of categorizing them because we love to categorize things. So for my purposes, crevice bats are ones that live in tight, dark spaces during the day. And perhaps hibernate in them through winter. So if you live in a crevice, your best camouflage is to be dark. So most of our bats are brown. So I'm going to break them into mostly brown bats, and then we're going to move into some of the outliers. So to start with, we have the big brown bat, and this is our ubiquitous bat. Little brown bats used to be the most widespread and abundant bat in North America, but they are also the most hard hit by white nose syndrome. So right now, the big brown bat is, this part of the world, of the country, our most common bat. This is the one who's in the attic, in the carport, behind the shutters, under the deck. These guys are in crevices all over the place. And they're one of our largest bats. They're the largest bat you're likely to come across. Weighing in, a robust adult is somewhere between 18 and 20 grams. So not that big, but they do have a 14-inch wingspan, so they can look pretty impressive if they're close by. So here we have our gummy bear and Twizzler scale for you to get a sense of just the weight and the breadth of that wingspan. They are beetle specialists, so they've got this big, broad, and bald muzzle here. That's sort of a distinctive feature of these guys. They're pretty beefy and they've got this broad muzzle. They're beetle specialists. They eat an amazing number of crop pests. So they're perfectly willing to take on a moth or a lacewing or whatever else out there. But these are our bigger, beefier bat. They're going to start dropping their pups in late May, early June, and they have twins. And they are 15 to 18 years in the wild. So this is the one you probably have seen. If you've been outside at dusk and looked up, you've probably seen this guy. Oh, and here's a little, they're born naked. This one's actually a few days old because its ears are up, but they're born with their ears glued to their head and their eyes are closed, and they're entirely dependent on the mother until they're able to go start foraging for themselves, and that's around 4 to 6 weeks, but they're not fully independent until they're a few months old. And here's our dear departed little brown bat. They're still around, but in very reduced numbers, and I haven't seen a living one in probably pushing 7, 8 years now. Oh, that's not true. I did see one living one, but she didn't live long, because when they come out of the caves, if they survive white nose while they're in the caves, when they come out, their wing tissue can be terribly, terribly damaged, and they aren't able to fly and get where they need to go. And it can actually be a progressive damage from the time they leave the cave. The secondary, the sequelae from having white nose will actually continue to affect their wings. So they can come out of the cave maybe a little bit flighted, and then they lose their flight ability. So top out at about 9 grams. So very, very small. And this was the barn bat and the old building bat. And you would see them over every farm pond and over all still water in creeks. This was if you were going out, you know, camping or fishing, and you went to the creek and there are a ton of little bats flying around. This was it. These guys are entirely dependent on caves for hibernation, whereas the big brown that we just saw can use other structures, cracks in rocks, and in our part of the country, not associated with caves for hibernation. This bat is, and so that's one of the reasons that their population is so reduced, because white nose is in the caves where they hibernate. And this is known to be one of our longest lived bats. I think the record is 34 years for this one. And probably only have 1 pup a year, maybe not even every year. So very low reproductive rate. So here's a comparison between our big and our little. So now you understand the big brown is a big brown bat because it's bigger than the little brown bat. We also have Indiana bats, because bats don't care what state they live in. Indiana bat was added to the endangered species list, one of the first animals back in the 60s. They were making a comeback until white nose hit. These guys are in the far western caves in Highland County and out that way. They don't come. There was supposedly an outlier colony in somewhere going toward the central Virginia, but they weren't able to ever find it again. So that's kind of sketchy. But these guys are currently only known from our high mountain regions. They're really similar to little brown bats, so you have to be an expert in order to distinguish one from the other. I haven't seen them together in years and years, and I'm not sure if I could still do it. I used to be pretty good at it, but yeah, it's tough. They have a shorter, broader nose, a more pinkish face, and their fur is more woolly. Oh, and they have a neater, tinier little foot. So it's really tough. These Myotis guys are all pretty closely related. And here, this is sort of one of our superstars. This is the northern long-eared bat. It is another Myotis species. It looks an awful lot like a little brown bat, except it has longer ears. This one is federally, oh, let me go back to the Indiana bat. This one is on the endangered species list and still is, even though it was almost ready to come off. This one has been added within the last few years because of white nose. It was added as threatened, but it's under review for full endangered status. So this one hard hit in the caves by white nose, but there is some inkling that there may be some populations that are not cave dependent out on the coastal plain, but that really hasn't been noodled out yet. These guys form smaller colonies than little browns. But generally, if you find an itty bitty bat with really long ears under your deck umbrella, you've got a federally listed species. Be nice to it. I've had the privilege of actually raising pups of both little browns and northern long ears, and they're just delightful little guys, even though they are very opinionated. So here's a comparison between the little brown and the northern long ear, and you can sort of see how closely related these guys are, because they're virtually indistinguishable until you start measuring ear length, and that little structure inside the ear right here is called the tragus. You have to be familiar with the shape and the length of those, but yeah, they're tough. We do have gray bats. They are a year-round cave resident. They do their maternity colonies in caves as well as using them for hibernacula, and this is another federally endangered species. They are starting to make a comeback. This is a bat that Merlin Tuttle formerly of Bat Conservation International, worked with a lot to get it listed. Because they're dependent on caves, you know, anything that happens to one of their caves can have a profound impact on the population. Also looks pretty much just like a little brown bat, unless you put the two of them together and you can see one's bigger. And also knowing where you are in the state. This is from more southern caves in the state. And then we have the Southeastern Myotis, which also looks just like the other Myotis, but it is not a cave bat, and it's in the southeastern part of the state, more along the coastal plain. It's not listed in any way, unlike the other ones. It may be under review for a state listing because they don't seem to be as abundant as they once were. This is a little dismal swamp kind of guy. They have twins, which is a little unusual for Myotis. Most of them only have one. And then we have the Eastern Small-Footed Bat, another Myotis that's even smaller than the rest of them. This one is our smallest bat. This is a Highlands Bat. And I've seen them actually using road ruts to drink from, because they're so small, they can't like drink from rapidly moving water. So up in the forest roads, in the parks, and I saw them in West Virginia on one of the Forest Service roads where the trucks had gouged the ruts, and they were coming down and drinking out of the puddles, which was horrifying to me because they were coming so close to the truck. And I've found during bat work, I've found some of these Myotis with broken arms, and I think it's from whip antennas on trucks. So I was just like, oh, go slow, don't. I don't want to have to rehab one of these guys. I've only ever rehabbed once, and it was a lovely little bat, but tiny, 4 to 5 grams, 9-inch wingspan, and associated with talus and scree slopes, which is kind of unusual. They have dispersed maternity colonies in the crevices under the rocks, and it's really cool. A lot of folks are working with them, radio transmitting them, and then finding them in these rock piles and avoiding the rattlesnakes while they're doing it. So they actually think that there's might be a predator-prey relationship between this bat and timber rattlesnakes. So very neat little bat. And one of the ways we were able to identify them when we were doing field work by netting them is they're so small, they basically fly right through the net. Another tiny bat that is not a Myotis is this evening bat, which looks just like a big brown bat, but is small like a Myotis, and this one throws everybody. They are not a cave-dependent bat. They are relatively unknown in the winter, so it's assumed they migrate south, but we're not really sure. They've been very abundant where they occur, so there hasn't been a lot of study done on them. They seem to be maybe making a range expansion to the north. We know most of them from Richmond and out on the eastern shore of the colonies. So, but they're around. We just don't see them a lot or know very much about them. Pretty cool little guys. So here's a comparison between your little brown and your evening. They are the same size, but you can see the little brown has that broad naked muzzle. I mean, the evening bat has the broad naked muzzle, whereas the little brown bat has this very pointy kind of furred face. And then I might be going really fast here. Then we have our these two, the Virginia big-ear bat and Raffinus big-ear bat. They are, the only way you can tell them apart is by where you're standing in the state, as far as I'm concerned. They look pretty much identical. And in fact, this guy on the bottom here is actually also a Virginia big-ear bat, because I've never seen a Raff in person to take its photograph. So these are actually Virginia big-ear bats this is our state bat, even though most of them live in West Virginia, and both of these photos were taken in West Virginia. This is from a project we were doing where they were bringing big ears into captivity to try to start an assurance colony in case it turned out that they were susceptible to white nose syndrome. Mercifully, they seem to be resistant and have not been as heavily impacted and seem to be doing fine in their maternity colonies. They are a year-round cave user. So there was some real concern that this very rare and geographically restricted species was going to be completely wiped out by white nose, but they tend to use sort of a different climatic conditions in the caverns and passageways they use. So it's a little drier and doesn't seem to support the fungus that causes white nose the way areas where the little browns and the other cave dependent bats use to hibernate. So it looks like dodged a bullet with Virginia big ear bats. They are still federally endangered. I don't see that changing anytime soon because of the very restricted area where these guys occur. Rafts, on the other hand, which again, this is not really one, are coastal plain, and they use hollow cypress trees, and there's some work being done with getting them some artificial maternity roost structures to replace some of the really ancient old hollow trees that are just disappearing from the landscape. But they are also, they're state endangered, not federal endangered. There are 4 subspecies of these Coronarhinus, and there's one in the Ozarks, which I think is also endangered. So they tend to occur in these small pockets. But again, in order to tell them apart, if you're standing on the coastal plain, it's a raft. If you're in the mountains, it's a Virginia big ear. And then our last brown bat is, which goes to gray or almost black, is the Brazilian freetail. Some people refer to it as a Mexican freetail, but it's a wide-ranging southern species, which seems to be starting to come a little bit farther north. We've had a few of these come into rehab, and we haven't been able to release them because they're incredibly social, and we don't know where the colonies are or if there are colonies. We don't know if these are maybe incidentals that got blown off course during migration, or if they are actually establishing populations. We think it might be the latter because we had a very young pup turn up in Charlottesville. And it looks like where they do turn up, it's either along a coastal, along the coast itself or along some of these riverine valleys. So along the James seems to be a hot spot. So I don't know. We don't really know what's going on with Brazilian freetails, but kind of cool to have a new one moving in. Really super short fur, these really, really broad ears that meet in the middle, and then this really wrinkly face here. And these guys have the most complex vocalizations of bats that we know of, and also have the distinction of being the fastest flighted animal. It used to be the common swift, but they did some work chasing these guys with planes and clocked them at higher speeds, which I don't happen to remember what it is at the moment. But, oh wait, here it is, 99.42 miles per hour. So these guys are fast and they can fly incredibly high. So really neat bats, but they're here, but not in great numbers. Also cave dependent in the southern part of their range, where they use caves for winter overwintering, and then they migrate a little farther north. The Texas colonies are best known, and those are maternity colonies. So they seem to use caves for most of what they do, but they also don't seem to mind moving into attics or other structures. So then we have this group that are less brownish. And we've got the tricolored bat, which is another cave hibernator and is now state endangered because of its status as a white nose victim. So this is under review for federal listing. You guys who go in caves have seen these. They tend to be dispersed all over the cave in winter. They don't cluster like the other ones do, but they have been absolutely hammered by white nose. This is one of our smallest bats, about 6 grams. And if you're hiking down a trail in a park and see a little bat fluttering just under the canopy above your head, it's probably one of these guys. When they disperse from the caves, they spread all over the state. Really neat. And then we have this interesting bat. This is a silverhair bat. They don't use caves. This is a tree hollow bat, but it appears to breed to the north and in higher elevations in Virginia, but they're really migratory and they turn up all over the place. Very dark black to gray, but they're one of our only bats that appears to be black, and then they have this gray to silver tipping on their backs. This is the one, if you ever go rent a cabin in winter and you bring the firewood in and you suddenly have a bat flying around, it'll be a silver hair because they actually seem to use wood piles to hibernate in. Pretty interesting behavior. And then our biggest one, the hoary bat. This is a long distance migrant. Some of them have been tracked moving between Canada and Mexico. This is our 30-gram bat, 16 or better wingspan, really big guys. This is our only multicolored bat. It's got the buff and black and the brown and silver. It's just an amazing bat. And hopefully everyone will get a chance to see one at some point, but I've seen fewer than a dozen. And they're not that common, but we do think they might be starting to reproduce in Virginia because we got a lactating female one year. And then this is another ubiquitous bat for Virginia. This is and let me go back and just point out that these guys are foliage roosting bats, and that's why the multicolored pelage, because it helps them blend into dappled light, bark and leaves and things like that. This red bat is probably our second most common bat that no one's ever seen because they do roost out in foliage. They're considered to be a solitary bat, except for when the mothers are rearing their young. These guys can have up to 4 pups. We don't think all 4 pups make it, but they are unusual in that. And that a mom, and she's a single mom, lives by herself, parks the babies in the leaves, and then if she decides to move them, she carries them one by one by one over to someplace else. So they're migratory. So if you ever hang out at Cape May warbler watching, you are likely to see these guys coming through as well. They've been picked up on bat detectors put out when they do surveys for offshore wind and they put the buoys out with bat detectors on them, they pick up red bats out there. So these guys, they fly far. And if you're watching bats at dusk and one just goes zing by your head, or higher up, but if it just moves in and out of the area, then it's probably a red bat because they are super fast flyers. They also can come out pretty early. So oftentimes you'll know it's a red bat because you can see that they're red and not brown. The Seminole bat looks almost exactly like a red bat, except it's more mahogany, and they're not common. They seem to be incidentals into the area, but I got 2 in Fairfax in 1 year. So I don't know whether that was storm related, climate conditions or what, but they're a little to the south, but they may turn up in the north every so often. And then our northern yellow, this one I think is only known from out Assateague area. I don't think it's ever come any farther north or been found any farther north. One thing that's interesting about these lazurines, the red, the hoary, the red, the Seminole, and the yellow here is they are pretty migratory. And the Seminoles have turned up underneath wind turbines in Pennsylvania, which is a horrible sampling method, but we think we don't know what these guys are doing because they're up so high, and maybe we're just not hearing them with bat detectors and certainly not netting them. So they could be around and we just don't know, but they don't turn up very often, but they're a big, just lovely, pale, tan to yellow. I've never seen one in real life. So that's what I have for the whirlwind tour of Virginia's bat species. If you go and find this slideshow on here, I'll show you how to get there. There's a quiz. You can go back and read everything. You can do the challenges. You can take a quiz and test your knowledge. You can see all these links to other places to go learn more about bats. But I'll show you how you get so you go to our website, Save Lucy campaign, under education. It's under virtual spaces. And if you wait forever for it to load, but if you come on down here, we've got a feature movie. You can click on that and watch one of our videos. And then if you click on the book, Bats of Virginia, it opens up the full presentation with even more words and challenges and things to do. So I am going to switch my camera over to my auxiliary camera, and I'm going to introduce you to one of our ambassador bats. And this is a great time. Let's see. Yep, it's over there. Meredith, can you ring in and let me know if you're seeing the, oh, wait, I have to stop sharing, don't I?
Yeah, I was just about to say.
Okay, so now what I need to do is figure out how I can see this bigger. Sorry, guys. I'm pretty good with the Zoom stuff, but now I'm only seeing Meredith.
Try it on speaker view. I just put it on speaker view and now I see what I think is probably a glove.
Oh, it's actually a cloth, but it's funny because all I see is you, but it's all right. We'll make it work. All right, so I'm going to try to bring out one of my favoriteest little ones that I raised from a pup, and we never could find a colony for her to go into, but she's not done this very often. So we'll see if we get any kind of cooperation out of her at all, like finding her. So one of the things about these guys is while they're not actively on, we give them a place to hang out and hide, and they take full advantage. So let me see where she went. But anyway, this is a great time. If you have questions, go right ahead and ask, and I will try to answer while I search for my my ambassador bat, who has decided she is better at hiding than I am better at finding.
Okay, so Audrey asks, what is the source of white nose syndrome? We thought it had been traced to European tourists touring the caves. Is that so?
Well, that's a really good question because in a nutshell, we don't really know. They've done a lot of DNA work and it does look like it came from Europe. But as far as whose shoe it was on when it got here, we don't know. And I don't know that we'll ever know because it happened. It might have sat in the cave for 20 years while it decided, while it reproduced to a point where it became pathogenic to our bats. So DNA suggests, well, I should say genetics suggests that it is of European origin. It's a really widespread fungus and it occurs, I hope everybody's hearing this complaining also while I'm talking.
Yes.
It occurs widely throughout Europe and Asia. But so let me just say, we probably don't know as much about fungi as we should, but they were able to differentiate certain strains of Pseudogymnoascus destructans. They found on European bats it doesn't affect them, nor does it affect Asian bats. Joe Hoyt now from Tech, he's at Tech now, he was over in China doing studies on PD there, and I guess through his studies determined that it didn't originate, our version didn't originate there. So it does look like it is from somewhere in Europe. But then figuring out, like I said, whose shoe it came on, was it a tourist? Was it, was it somebody who was mucking around in some other part of the cave where they shouldn't have been? We really will never know. One thing I will tell you is the parsimoniousness suggests it did not come from some random single bat that flew over from Europe, found Howe Cavern, managed to make it in there and decide to hibernate with other bats. I mean, I hear that over and over and over again, and there's no biologist that I know of that supports that theory, that it has an anthropogenic source. So, and I hear it a lot in the caving community, and I would just really like to put that to bed. If you think about it, yes, an occasional bat ends up on a transport ship. It might have gone into the harbor at New York. From there, how would a random bat who's in terrible shape from having traversed an ocean figure out, oh, I need to go to the mountains of New York to hibernate? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense from ethology, like how do bats behave? It doesn't make any sense that it would have been that origin. So that's what I have to say about that.
Okay, the next question is, do all bats carry rabies and can it be transmitted through biting to humans?
Okay, so bats are a rabies vector species, which means, so let's put it this way, humans are an influenza vector species. So it's in our population and it circulates. There are certain times when it's more prevalent than others. Rabies is similar. Rabies just has the unfortunate habit of being fatal if you contract it. All bats do not have rabies. 0.5% of the wild population at any given time might have rabies. You get higher percentages in the summer when they're being submitted for testing. So you've kind of taken that sample population and necked it down into a subset that's more likely to have rabies. So you can sometimes see like 5% in public health testing. But in general, bats don't have a lot of rabies. They have much less rabies than raccoons or skunks or foxes. And probably because they're an original rabies vector species and they've had a long time to work with the virus and sort of become, I don't want to say immune, but they are fairly resistant to it. So let me just introduce our little bat here. What are you doing? So she's making a really funny face right now. This is Bits. She's an evening bat, that one that I said we don't really know what they do in winter, the little one that looks just like a big brown, only an itty bitty. So what I'm going to try to do here is I have a quarter. I know it's hard when everything's in frame. So this is actually a bat quarter, and I'm putting it next to her so you can see she's just a tiny little thing. And she was like, "What is that?" And evening bats are famous for complaining, and she's demonstrating that right now. I'm going to turn on my bat detector and see if we can get her to echolocate. Not get her to, see if she will echolocate. I don't ask bats to do much of anything they don't want to do, but I am going to try and see if she'll take a little snack here. And snacks around here consist of mealworms, and super snacks are mealworms that I've just plucked the head off of, so they're all gushy. You want mealworm guts, delicious. So we can take some more questions.
Okay, here's one from the chat. Tom asks, do humans transmit white nose syndrome?
$1 million question. I think the consensus has been that once white nose got here and it was, oh, there we have some echolocation, and bats were growing it, then yeah, then the bats were sorry, I got to move her for a second. She got a little nervous. Humans are much less of a factor than the bats themselves. So yet now the major source of transmission of white nose is the bats. They move around between their caves. They go out on the landscape in the summer. They go back into a cave. I think she's done. Let me get another bat. I'll keep talking.
Okay. And I will ask, let's see, Emily asks, you spoke about big browns using rock faces as hibernacula, but I'm working currently on my master's thesis on eastern small-footeds using the same hibernacula.
Ooh.
Both species seem to be fairly prevalent still. Do you think that this overwintering strategy and the hibernacula characteristics itself, temperature and humidity, mitigate the spread of PD?
Ooh, excellent question. I'm probably not enough. I hope you all are hearing the clicking. That's my little complainer echolocating away now that I've put her down. I'm not an expert enough in the physiology of PD on bats, but I do know that there's been a lot of work done looking at big brown, the microbiome of big brown wings, and there's something that they've determined is resistant to PD growing on big browns. And that's interesting that the small-footeds don't even use the caves for hibernation, and I would think that, yeah, that would keep them from coming in contact with the fungus, and so it couldn't grow on them because they're not in contact with it. So that's very cool to know, and thank you for that, and thank you for the work you're doing.
And if you two don't know each other already, you should contact each other.
Absolutely. You can come sample, you can come do whatever, wing swabbing you need to do on big brown bats all day long. All right. Did somebody just pop up some references there? Thank you for that. All right, I'm going to put another bat on who's a little less grumpy. Hi, I shouldn't say that Bits is grumpy. She's just, she's an evening bat, and they just tend to be pretty opinionated. So this guy here, you'll see he looks a lot like Bits, but he is a big brown bat. So he is much larger. Here's the same quarter next to him. And I'm going to try and turn my hand so you can see Curly in all his glory. So you can see he's a much larger bat. He is also echolocating. I have this bat detector right here running. So when he echolocates, you can hear the clicking. You can also hear the hissing from everything that makes ultrasound in the world, which we normally can't hear. But so this is Curly, and he's going to earn his snack.
Leslie, Danny's asking, recognizing that bat echolocation calls are very loud, do you happen to know what decibel level a call needs to be for it to be detected by an anabat detector?
I do not. So I have an anabat walkabout, which I don't use as often because I can't afford the software, nor do I seem to be able to find the time to sit down and do, I'm going to turn off the detector right now, to sit there and do call analysis. So what I tend to use is the Echometer Touch, which I know is not diagnostic, but it gives you can sort of start to be able to look at the sonogram and get a sense of what it might be just by looking at the sonogram. And I find that it misses a lot. Like I can see the bats, but it's not coming through on the detector. So there's like such an art and plus science of how to set detectors so that you're actually getting a reasonable sample. And so most of that's going to be passive acoustic monitoring, where you've got your detectors up in the air and you're so you're closer to the bats, and then like humidity levels, all the conditions, climatic conditions can really affect how far those calls go. And I am not good enough to explain it all, but there are plenty of people who are. And there's actually a Facebook group that I can't think of the name right now. Maybe I can throw it up in the chat later on. But yeah, it's just people who do bat detectoring talking to each other about setups and things. So it's a good resource. I'm much better on like bat behavior and seasonality and that sort of stuff. The technical aspects of monitoring and field research and stuff, I just don't do that so much anymore because I kind of just get bats that come into rehab now. So taking over my world. Kaleidoscope, is that Kaleidoscope Facebook group? Yep. Anything else? While you're thinking about questions, I'm going to show you bat toes, because I'm glad to see all the folks out here who are working with bats in one way or another, but most people don't get to see bat toes. And you'll notice that the bat toes are very, very, very small. And that's what allows bats to hang from surfaces like rough wood or rock faces. And then they have a tendon structure, so the weight of their body actually keeps their toes curled, so they are expending no energy when they're hanging nose down. Really cool adaptation to keep you above predators and allow you to drop into flight pretty easily.
So when you say they're expending no energy, they're just kind of hanging, they're not gripping.
Correct. So birds
cool.
do it in the opposite direction, because if you think about it, if a bird spent the night like clamped onto a twig, that would be a huge energy expenditure. So they have actually like a locking mechanism that keep their feet clamped while they're at rest. And same with bats. Yep, they actually have to kind of flap their wings and lift some of the weight up off their feet, and then they can just release their toes. And I would just like to put another myth to bed. They can take off from the ground. It would be a dumb evolutionary track to be totally vulnerable if you're on the ground. So they just need some forward space to do it. Red bats are really good at it. I've seen red bats take off from the ground where it looks like they just bounced up, and that's not entirely true. They do have to go forward. These big browns kind of need to row along the ground a little bit until they get enough air under their wings, but they can take off from the ground. So, you know, a grounded bat may just have been blown down or knocked down by a bird, or for whatever reason have come to the ground. It doesn't mean they're, you know, dead or sick or whatever. You know, they do better if they can get to a tree and climb the tree and then drop into flight. But given enough pressure, they can get off the ground. Anything else?
Not so far. People are enjoying watching the bats.
All right, I'm going to give him another mealworm then.
Okay. And you know, you are welcome to stay on for another 8 minutes, Leslie. But after that, we'll have to take a couple of minute break for the next.
Oh, that's fine. I went faster than I thought I would. Does anyone have any questions about the other species that, you know, maybe you didn't know about or curious about? You know, here, I'm just going to throw out some things. What can you do to help bats in the face of white nose and that 90% loss? We really need to support the summer habitat. We just have got to, and it's not bat boxes because they're not always well accepted, especially, I mean, there's got to be 50 million bat boxes out on the landscape with no bats in them. So, you know, every scout wants to build bat boxes. So if it's appropriate and you have the time to put them up and monitor them and make sure somebody's using them, and if not, take them down and move them, or do the experimental setup to see, you know, what kind of bats are using what kind of box in Virginia, because it's, you know, predicated by region. You can put bat boxes up in the Southeast and get freetails and evening bats moving in, and it's great and wonderful. But here in Virginia, where our bats just don't seem to be that keen on bat boxes, so we need to do a little bit more to figure out what kinds they like and what kinds are actually helpful. And then just supporting the summer habitat, you know, any kind of habitat mitigation that you can be part of, whether it's, you know, planting natives or getting involved in, you know, master naturalists or whatever you do that supports local habitat is supporting the bats. And then of course, get out there and, you know, tolerance, you know, put the myth of all bats have rabies to bed. You know, help people understand the only way you can get rabies is to get bitten. So don't get bitten. It's not that hard to not be bitten by wild animals.
Right. Hey, so Bob Golden asks, why are pips now called tricolored?
I don't know, because somebody really wanted to ruin a good thing. No,
I actually have an answer to that.
Okay. Is it the European species?
Yeah. Because the European species, it's called pipistrelle, and they didn't want to confuse the two. They chose to change the name to differentiate between the both. And also I have like just one small comment about the bat houses. We actually had quite a big maternity colony of brick browns in our attic, which was not convenient, of course. And we built a bat house and were concerned if they're gonna start using it, but they did. So now we have the same amount of bats in our bat house. So it seems that big browns at least like them.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the one time where we consistently see occupancy is a big brown colony, and the property owner has put up a bat box as alternate habitat, and then we almost always see the big browns will move in. If they can still get back in the attic though, they'll do that.
Oh yeah, we put a big protection over that. They're not entering again. Yeah.
But yeah, good for you. And as a matter of fact, the kind of information that's really helpful for people is like, you know, what compass direction did you put the box? What kind of box is it? What color is it? That sort of data. And Bat Conservation International used to collect it, and I don't think they are anymore. So it would be nice to have some kind of clearinghouse just for Virginia.
Yeah, we actually use the Bats, what is Bats International?
Yeah.
They actually have a plan how to build a bat house, and that's what we used. We basically followed their instructions.
Yep. And again, that's a big brown thing. They also, because I have, so I release big browns on my property after they're, the juveniles are done with rehab. I release them here. And so we put up bat boxes and basically the same sort of design, the multi-chamber maternity box. And they're in them, they use them. So yeah, big browns are a little, this is my kind of joke, is that I think big browns don't mind living around people. And I think they want to be domesticated. So that's why they keep moving in.
Okay, Leslie, one final question. Sharon Rittenauer asks, what's the best way we can support your efforts?
Oh,
So
me?
Yeah.
So really good news. So because of COVID, we were shut down. We were not allowed to rehabilitate bats. We were not allowed to release any of the bats that were in rehabilitation. So we have been very quiet and sort of dead in the water for just over a year. Last week, we got permission to start rehabilitating again. So one of the ways you can support us is if you go on our website, and it's in there somewhere. We have a wish list for Chewy and for Amazon. Just supplies is huge. We'll always take your money, but supplies are really, really helpful. Volunteering is helpful, and volunteering to transport is crucial because a lot of these bats, they're spread out across the state, and there are probably in total 6 rehabbers for the entire state. And I'm like the biggest one. So, and I'm way out in the middle of the Shenandoah. As a matter of fact, I'm very close to Grand Caverns. But so, getting these bats where they need to go if they need help is really crucial too. So you can reach out to me and we can talk whatever you're able to do or want to do.
And transporting bats for Leslie is really cool because when you get there, she'll probably give you a tour of her facilities.
I probably will. And the view is nice, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, well,
thank you all.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and for everybody who had great questions, and support the Save Lucy campaign.